Do you feel gassed halfway through a game? Feel good for a while, but by mid-game you're ready to crash, or worse, you're ready to fall asleep right there on the field. The truth is it's not just about conditioning and it's not even just about sleep, although that's important. It's about how you eat. Welcome back to the Student Athlete Performance Podcast, where we help you unlock your full potential through better training, better nutrition, and a better mindset. Today, I'm joined by Meredith Parmley, former D1 runner at University of Houston, sports dietitian with the Houston Dynamo FC, and for Houston Christian University. We're breaking down how to fuel for endurance, how to stay energized all game long, and why most athletes are running on empty without even realizing it. So let's get to it. Meredith, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. Yeah. And it'll be fun for listeners. This is a coworker of Hannah. So you'll definitely get some of that element, but you're also going to get, again, experience from somebody who was in your shoes, who was a D1 runner. So we'll be able to get into some of that too. So first off, I asked Hannah a similar question. What would you say is the most common fueling mistake you see endurance athletes make?
Yeah, not fueling before morning practice. So especially here in Texas, it's really hot. And so a lot of like distance runners and even team sport athletes going to early morning lifts, they are just rolling out of bed, showing up and expecting to get the most out of themselves. And then most of the time when an athlete's like, I've been feeling terrible in these workouts, and it's like, well, have you eaten anything? No. Okay, well, that's probably where we need to start. But I know it's really challenging. Like the main barriers they're facing are lack of time, lack of appetite. I think back to when I was in high school and like I didn't want to sacrifice a minute of sleep either. And so it's fun to work with those types of athletes to be creative so that we support their performance, health, recovery, all of those things.
So what would you say, what are some common go-tos you would say for those morning workouts?
Yeah. So if an athlete's not doing anything at all, I always start with some type of liquid option. Like, can we take a few sips of juice or your favorite sports drink? Or in endurance running, there's more like drink mixes or different products out there, not just electrolytes, but ones that contain carbs specifically. That I'll always say, like, let's just start there. Let's get used to you thinking about this and getting used to waking up and intaking something. Other kind of what I call like easy to get down options would be like applesauce pouches or things that don't require much chewing. So like, half a banana or something like that. I find that's a really great place to start and get used to. And then you can always maybe try to amp it up from there, but really starting with the like easiest thing that athlete can do.
Yeah. So you mentioned like different other options for the other than sports drinks. Are you thinking like clustered dextrin type stuff, or what kind of things are you thinking?
Yeah, like a lot of distance runners kind of complain about sports drinks feeling too like heavy or like don't like the taste or something. And so like Scratch Labs has a mix that's kind of like unflavored, even though it's going to be like slightly sweet because it's carbs. So sometimes I'll point them that direction. I would say that's like usually we can find something that's more readily available at like grocery stores and stuff. But that's definitely an option if you're looking for, if you've tried a bunch of stuff and nothing is really sounding appetizing in the morning. Sometimes I'll start with something like,
yeah, actually I have Scratch Labs on my shelf over there. That's why I asked. I was like,
yep.
And just because I mentioned the cluster addiction, do you mind, I'm curious how you would explain that for listeners who are like, what is that?
Yeah. So I will say I haven't tried that product, but my understanding is that it's trying to improve like how your stomach is able to tolerate it, pack more carbohydrate into a easier to digest kind of structure. So more bang for your buck in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
less upset stomach, but similar workings as like a slow digesting carb, like a maybe a bagel or toast or something like that.
Right. Yep.
So many athletes don't just need to fuel for practices and games; they really need to eat like all day. So what are some of those key habits that they should really be focusing on? When they have those afternoon or late practices.
I will say I still find athletes, even if they're not training until the afternoon, like kind of skipping or skimping on that kind of first fueling opportunity. So I feel like my like call to action this whole year has been like trying to get athletes to eat a better performance enhancing breakfast. And oftentimes what that looks like is like either maybe a small volume, just carbohydrate option, and we need to add like protein and color to it, or on the flip side, like nothing. And it's like, okay, well, can we start somewhere like we just talked about? So that's kind of been my mission, if you will, of like, okay, let's figure this out because there's, just so limited fueling opportunities for these busy student athletes, even professional athletes to meet their demands. And so if we're really missing that opportunity, it's hard to make up for, or we're like getting home from afternoon, evening practices, like starving and then not really in the right headspace to necessarily make the most like health promoting decisions either. Like,
Mhm.
so I think that's kind of been a key focus of mine is like, can we be creative and again find like what the athlete's willing and able to do to not miss that opportunity.
Yeah. One, I like that you mentioned too, you're more likely to gravitate towards the not as ideal options. So if you're an
Yeah.
athlete where like you want to cut out the chips, you want to cut out the soda, like chances are you need to actually eat more in order to not crave those things as much.
Yes, I have a very personal anecdote about this.
Mm.
So I high school runner. I grew up in Michigan, so we practice after school and I didn't know it at the time, but I was a very light breakfast eater, kind of a smaller lunch, didn't want to feel heavy during practice. So like kind of unintentionally underfueled. And then I'd get home from practice and be just starving. And so my craving was always like barbecue potato chips. And like I would just eat so much of them before dinner because I was just like craving it so much. And now I understand like, yeah, if you are low on energy, if you haven't consumed enough energy all day, your brain, your body's going to immediately go to those energy dense options that aren't always the best options for your recovery. Like, not that barbecue potato chips are inherently bad, but like they weren't supporting my recovery the way they could. So just knowing that, and instead of getting frustrated about like why you keep craving these things, just help yourself out earlier in the day and kind of set yourself up for success.
Yeah. Well, and I want to ask you too, again, just coming from your experience, like what, now that you're a nutrition expert, like what were some of those shifts or like, how do you feel, whether it was while you're competing or even after you're competing, when you started changing how you ate, what did that feel like?
Yeah, I will say initially kind of strange. So I didn't really understand the extent of my underfueling until I was a collegiate athlete. So I again went from practicing after school where I could get away with it a bit more because I had at least had a couple meals to in college, practicing early in the morning, again going to run 8 miles a day, sometimes workouts with like on a like one bite of a cracker or something ridiculous because I was just like, and then I started studying nutrition more and understanding just how wrong I was doing things. But it actually didn't really click until I had kind of been too far gone. So like my senior or junior year of cross country in high school, I was severely anemic and like corrected that. Didn't really link it to underfueling, just relied on like supplementation. Get to college, big increase in mileage, but was handling it really well, kind of was finishing among upperclassmen, super excited about it. And then after that first year, like I had a soft tissue injury. Like, okay, had to redshirt outdoor track and then trained through the summer for cross country, first stress fracture. Okay, I'd never experienced an injury that severe before. Cross train, try to get back into it that next year after redshirting, and second stress fracture because I hadn't changed those dietary habits. So then actually it aligned nicely with my nutrition degree to where I got to do a project on the female athlete triad and REDS. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like textbook what's happening to me. And from there, really, again, found options in the morning that was like, if I can get anything in, I will be happy. And really had to do some trial and error. I have a sensitive stomach. So like I landed on applesauce pouches, or sometimes that just wouldn't be appealing. And so it's like these different granola bars that just like look good at the grocery store to try to keep it switching up so that I'm at least fueling. And then I would also say just I was a bad planner. Like I would practice, have my breakfast, and then I just wouldn't think about like having the right snacks or and enough snacks throughout the day. So I'd just be sitting in class all day. And then I'd get home in the evening and be like really hungry, have a large dinner. So there were so many signs that I should have been like evenly distributing my energy intake, especially around my runs and my weight sessions. And until I kind of progressed in my education, I just didn't really recognize those. And I feel like now it's becoming more common for athletic trainers and docs and everything to kind of ask about these things. But we were kind of coming up along with the wave that takes some time to trickle down. So now that's why I love getting to talk about this, because I loved what you said at the beginning of nutrition's a tool to unlock your potential. And I just think about like if I wouldn't have figured that out for myself, what I would have left on the table. Like maybe I would have been done running. Maybe I would have stayed in that injury cycle. I know so many runners that that's the case of, and I'm still, I would say, competing at a fairly high level now and still love running. And so it's just a testament to like why this matters. And it sounds so simple, but it's really like longevity in your sport that's at risk here too.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I always emphasize to my athletes too. Like a lot of my athletes are more baseball, football, maybe soccer, basketball. And, you look at the athletes who lasted, and they're the ones
Yep.
who really took care of what they put in. They took care of their recovery, all those types of things. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I know like, and I know you can test to this, like runners, yes, maybe one of the big populations of athletes who are not eating enough, but I even see it again in these baseball, football players. Even the large guys who are like 250, 300 pounds are not
Mm-hmm.
often eating enough, and it's a big hole. And so like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I will speak to that. Like, so with the football team at HCU, I get the same thing. And there's guys who like really need to put on muscle mass to be able to be safe on the field. And they're, hitting the gym, trying so hard to put on muscle, but that nutrition piece is missing. And on the flip side, sometimes you have athletes that they've been told they need to be a certain weight, and that causes a lot of stress. Or maybe they need to, like, maybe a coach has told them they actually need to be leaner, and then they just like, I had this just recently, like kind of stop eating or like cut out carbs, and it's like, no, like that is the worst thing you can do for your muscle mass. So there's just strategic ways to go about it. Even though you're a large athlete doesn't mean that you're any, I would say, less susceptible to making the same types of mistakes.
yeah. I mean, I even have an athlete now who it was actually when we added more to what he was eating that he started to lean out. And
Right.
yeah, and that's where you talk about the fueling for the workouts, and that's a big
Mhm.
deal.
Yeah, like if you're able to do more reps, if you're able to sustain that higher intensity, like you can see how that would ultimately result in some of these goals that the athlete has.
Yeah. So, what about mid game or mid race or even like mid practice? What are some things that you find are really beneficial either for runners, soccer players, and some of the other athletes out there?
Yeah, yeah. So with the Dynamo, we will do a lot of gels and chews, and that's very similar with runners too. Like what's portable. Obviously, for team sports, there's like a locker room that you can have that set up. For runners, it's like carrying it on you, or maybe aid stations or different things. But those and liquid options are really easy to get down, even if you're not feeling it, which is a big barrier at halftime. Especially, I find I always think about like the emotional component to sports. Like if you're coming in at halftime and things aren't going your way, like nutrition's probably not at the forefront of your mind. You're like trying to talk with your teammates and your coach and figure out what you need to do. So the keys are practicing with it, so it's just inherent and you don't have to like think about it. And then two, having that option that's like easiest for you to take. So yeah, we'll do gels, sports drinks, chews or fruit snacks, but we'll also have a variety of like granola bars, and different options for those that are like that do prefer more of a solid option. I find that to be popular with guys who maybe are too nervous before the game to get like a full pregame meal or something, and then they're kind of feeling a little hungry. They want more of that like solid option to sustain them. But for me, ideally, we get like the quicker digested carbs in.
Yeah, especially I mean soccer. I mean I know especially at the youth and high school level, it's like it's a quick turnaround at halftime compared to like
Super
football.
quick.
Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
it can be hard to get something in that's not going to be. I mean even like applesauce, even applesauce can be hard.
Yes. Yeah, we
With a
have that there
5 minute
too.
break.
Yeah.
What is there any like again going to your experience with the college and the pros, like are there any athletes, you don't have to say names, but like any experiences you've seen with some of them where they were not doing it and then they started fueling that mid-game, halftime, etc., and then they're like, wow, like energy shot up, and that transition?
Yes. Yeah, my first year as a sports dietitian, I was working with the professional women's team here in Houston, the Dash, and we had this big name international player, and she kept cramping in like the last few minutes of the game. And she was doing like a gel, just a classic like 20-gram gel. But again, I don't think her like pregame fuel was that great. And so we bumped her to one of the like higher 40-gram gels. So same volume, just higher concentration. And again, there's probably a multitude of factors with cramping, but she didn't cramp that next game. So that was great for me as a young practitioner, because she was like, yeah, you got me. And like that buy-in was great. And then from there we were able to like take that low hanging fruit and then look at like, okay, we're going to continue to do this because you're running like over the course of a soccer game, like insane distances, but let's also look at this piece and this piece to ensure that that doesn't happen. And then, yeah, the rest of the season, she didn't really have that same issue. And so it was really fun for me to get that trust so quickly, because oftentimes that's not the case and you have to kind of work for it. But that was a really fun one, especially for her being one of like the key players on the team.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, speaking to parents, coaches, trainers, like, you have to identify what are those quick wins that you can pull in, like, and
Yeah.
those are those quick wins where they're going to feel it like very quickly. They're going to notice the difference. They see that difference and they're going to be more bought into nutrition as a whole.
For sure. Yeah.
What would you say in terms of, when we're fueling a soccer player or an endurance like runner, how would you compare that to working with, say, football, baseball, etc., in terms of like how they eat?
Yeah. I think that the sport culture is so interesting, and like I think those are the main differences. You have to I have to speak their language. So obviously I went to college for distance running, but I grew up playing softball and basketball and all these other team sports. And so I feel like I'm able to kind of put those different hats on very quickly. And in fact, there are sometimes runners I work with that are very like type A and kind of more anxious individuals that I don't always like resonate with all the time. And so I feel like understanding the culture, understanding like what they're doing, what they're being asked to do. And so you can explicitly say like, hey, yeah, when you eat carbohydrates, you're able to block better, or you're able to sustain that intensity. Like I find that helps a lot. But as far as difference in habits, like we kind of touched on this already, but there are definitely, I feel like especially young athletes in this world of comparison get very hung up on like a specific body type, or get being very dissatisfied with their body. And that I think across the board can result in some of the underfueling we talked about. I think distance runners and sports that are more aesthetic based are definitely more conscious in my experience, and more fearful of adding things in, or kind of like experimenting and trying new things. And that makes sense to me because it's an individual sport. Like if anything changes, it just is, it's you out there versus like a team. There's so much going on that's not always necessarily, I've still seen coaches do that where they're like, you need to, you know, drop whatever. But I would say my basketball players, for example, I'm always trying to get them to think more about like health after their sport, for example. Like they're actually more likely to choose fast food a lot. And like, not again, not that that's a bad thing, but like the frequency with which we're doing it, and trying to relate that to like, okay, yeah, you're feeling sluggish on the court and you're not recovering well. Like, let's think about that, how that's impacting our digestion and our health. And then also, I think with the basketball players, or maybe like team sports, I find there's like different, and runners, there's different types of picky. Like, so navigating the different like trends among the sport and then the different preferences is really, it's a fun challenge, I think, to find what an athlete's willing to try.
Yeah. So with the fast food, you mentioned specifically with the basketball players, one
Yeah.
thing that I also noticed though with that is a lot of times back to the underfueling part, a lot of times it's coming from that, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily like, I mean, yes, it's the convenience of it, but a lot of times we go for convenience when we're starving.
Right. For sure. Yeah. And I think it's also, for at least in the settings I'm at, it's what's around. And so it's like that availability piece too. One, I the way I kind of talk with athletes about this is it's called, like, I call it an athlete's fast food framework. And it's like, okay, I want you to be able to go to these types of places with your friends and teammates. But if we're doing this multiple times a week, like, how are we going to make this sustainable? And so I'll kind of break it down into these three components. We have our entree, we have our side, we have our drink. If we can make one health promoting swap out of those things, I'll be super happy. So like Chick-fil-A is huge here. So I'll say like, okay, maybe you're craving that chicken sandwich. Fine. Let's, have that, and then choose, like, they have a grapefruit cup actually that's like not just dry apple slices. So I'll say like, let's get that, and then some water, or they have Powerade or something if you have a hard practice. So one day maybe we'll do that. The next, maybe you're craving those fries, so let's opt for a grilled chicken option. Have the fries. If we can do water, great. And then that way it's like, again, that buy-in, but I try to help them realize those small tweaks over time. You don't need to drastically change up everything, but that can really make a difference when you think about just how frequently an athlete might be doing something like that.
Yeah. Well, and even trying to be like, hey, can we go to like Pan Express and I can get my grilled teriyaki chicken or something?
Right.
Chipotle,
Yeah.
you can kind of, one of the things that I talk about with my athletes is the goal of, especially with all the calculators that are on the sites nowadays, and trying to double your protein to fat grams. So you're getting like, say, 40 grams of protein, 20 grams of fat, because then it's more balanced essentially. And I mean, the idea that you talk about is essentially going down that road.
Yeah, for sure.
What about for planning though? Because I know that's part of the reason why, with the fast food is more so just the timing and stuff. What would be some of your top like meal ideas for somebody who is constantly on the go?
Yeah. I think that if you're able to do any type of prep ahead of time, so maybe that's making an extra portion for dinner, like, that's such a cheat code. Or if your parents are able to do that, that helps so much, because oftentimes the athletes I talk to, like, they're having a really adequate, great performance plate for dinner. So if we can just make an extra portion of whatever that is, like, that really helps with the next day. But I think another issue I run into is athletes being like, I'm so sick of this sandwich that I have every day. And so I'll use a lot of like microwave rice pouches, like chicken pouches, tuna pouches. I'm trying to always find like shelf stable options so that it's not like nasty sitting in your bag all day, or even switching it up from like a sandwich to a wrap, or changing up like a condiment or like a side with that can really help have all the same components that we need, but help it not be so boring. Another might be, so like chickpea pasta, or things that like hold pretty well. Like, you can make a big batch of rice or protein pasta and like use that with various proteins or with different cuisines. So that's usually some of the meal ideas that I'll point athletes towards. And then as far as snacks goes, kind of the same thing. Especially protein can be hard to keep in your bag all day if you're in this like afternoon practice scenario. So I've really been loving the like chopsticks and like turkey jerky. And then also dried edamame is like a good cheat code too. I don't know if you've tried that, but it's like salty, crunchy, but it's a great source of plant-based protein and some fiber. And so it's obviously not the same as like their favorite bag of chips, but it kind of can fill that craving, or that kind of hit that taste bud a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, even like combining it with certain things can make it
Right.
more tolerable. I mean, that's one thing, because I was not a vegetable eater as a kid, and so one of the things that I started to do in college as I'm like studying nutrition and stuff, I'm like, okay, well, like, I'm gonna have a long drive, over the past like 2 hour drive. I'm like, I'm gonna need snacks, so I would be like, okay, I'm gonna eat the cucumbers, but I don't love cucumbers, so I'm gonna have some chips with that, and so I'd like eat
Yeah.
them at the same time, basically, to try to like
Right.
balance it out.
Yeah. This is the same way I try to hide veggies and things. So like another meal idea that you could potentially do that would be like flatbread. So you basically can make like your own pizza, but put veggies on it, but there's cheese and other things, and it's not as noticeable. Or same thing with smoothies, like blend them up, throw a banana in there. You're not going to taste the veggies. You're going to taste that banana. That's the most powerful taste in that smoothie. So yeah, all the creative ways to get those in.
Yeah. One, the taste buds piece too is like your taste buds start to get used to it, even if you're getting like little tiny
Yeah.
little tastes of it every now and then. Like
Right.
you're rewiring those taste buds in a way.
Yes. Yeah. You just got to keep trying.
Yeah. So I want to make sure we address a little bit more on the underfueling part and like help athletes identify like, are you actually eating enough? And so what would be like, how would athletes know if they're not eating enough for their training demands? Like what would be some signs?
Yeah. Yeah, really great question. I will say the first kind of flags I have seen in my practice are like GI issues. So feeling full very quickly or feeling bloated after most of your meals or snacks. That's kind of a sign digestive system is slowing down because energy is getting directed elsewhere. I've also seen like sleep disruption or disturbances, not feeling well rested after sleeping for long periods of time or waking up frequently throughout the night. And then, of course, just if you're always feeling like you're not recovering well or you're plateauing in the weight room or in your speed, if you are having many injuries or falling sick frequently, all of those can be signs that kind of what we call those background functions, the body's just not taking care of business as usual. So those would be common ones. For female athletes specifically, looking at menstrual cycle regularities and things like that. But obviously for male athletes, we don't have anything that blatant to track. So for them, it's usually more of those like energy levels, plateaus, and then like injuries as well.
Any specific examples you might have for the male athletes too? Because I know we can have tons of female athletes, but I'm curious if you have any specific examples of athletes you've seen that struggled with this.
Yeah, I will say the the majority of athletes that have fallen into what I would consider like long-term underfueling to where it's negatively impacting health is more of my distance runners. So I've definitely seen collegiate males get in this like stress fracture cycle as well. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening in team sports. I think what we know with male athletes is that it is easier to get out of it. So like if you do notice these signs and you take action, it probably isn't as like consequential or has as much long-term effects as we see in female athletes that maybe takes a little bit longer to kind of dig our way out. So I think that's, really hopeful for male athletes is, if you are noticing like I would say like dropping weight too. Like if you're a high school athlete and you're dropping weight, that's actually not what we really want most of the time. So that would be a sign as well. Not that you need to track that every day, but if you're noticing that or actively trying to do that, just be really cautious because that can lead down a slippery slope.
One, how fast you lose that weight can, if you lose it really fast, that can also be an indicator that you might be on path to an injury, because again, that
Right.
underfueling.
Yep.
Would you be able to like kind of in a way for the athletes to understand like what does underfueling actually do to the body?
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to think of it as we have these couple compartments that make up our total energy output in the day. So, one category you can think of as your body just staying alive. So, this is going to be all the background functions that you don't think about, but the body's amazing and does anyway. So, like your immune system, your bone turnover, your organ functioning, like building muscle or turning over muscle, all of these things we're not actively doing, but the body's like a reproductive system, menstrual cycle for female athletes, right? All these background functions. So that's going to be the biggest output for all of our days. We also have energy outputs from just when we digest and process food. That's kind of like the factory working to process what we eat so that we can absorb those nutrients. And then we have any activity we do that we wouldn't necessarily consider training. So if you're like walking your dog or playing, recreational sports outside of your training, even going to class, carrying books, doing all these things add up, depending like if you're a college athlete walking across campus like multiple times. And then of course we have that exercise piece. So this varies the most depending on what time of season you're in, depending on how much you play, your level, your position, if it's a rest day or a hard day. So that varies the most. But basically, your body's really smart and it knows that you are going to show up, you're going to train every day as an athlete or most days, and that these outputs can be really high. So if we're not eating enough to cover all of those outputs, that exercise and training output is the most stress on the body. So it's going to direct energy from that first category, that just being alive category, towards that exercise piece. And then, not that you're going to like die, but things will start slowing down and function less optimally. So that's where we start to see little hiccups in the road and these signs that start to flash and say, like, hey, something's going on here. We need to eat enough so that all of this has enough to continue on its way.
When it's like, when you think about, like, I like to highlight this too for those, again, those athletes who try to lean out, is some of them, like, that they go into essentially like this starvation mode because they're under fueling for so long that their body's just like, well, I just need to survive over here. So then it's like, it basically just tries to maintain the status quo essentially.
Yeah, for sure. There's really interesting research looking at what happens to like muscle building when you do something like when you fall in that low energy availability. And yeah, you might like lose weight and lean out, but most of that weight is probably coming from muscle mass, because that's a very expensive process for the body to maintain. So that's one of the first ones that it's going to slow down, because it doesn't want to create a tissue that's going to make those needs higher, so
I know and that's why I try to, like, because we're told, like, okay, like muscle burns more calories at rest. So even when you're not doing anything, like, muscle burns more calories. So that's a good red flag in a way. Just as a wrap up question, if an athlete listening to the episode takes away like just one thing for fueling for performance, like, what would you really want it to be?
Oh, I love this question. I would say to not underestimate the impact of nutrition on your potential, and like looking at it as a tool and not something that is, like boring or doesn't deserve as much thought as like your training itself. And so that would mean for me, like making sure we are fueling well before and after our training sessions. I work with so many athletes that are training multiple times a day, and food can get, there's a lot of mental energy that goes into it. And it can kind of be like this annoyance, but that is truly the best thing that you can do to maximize your potential. So find 2 to 3 options for both of those situations. I call it like your tool belt, right? So sometimes we can have these great meals that require more effort and energy because we're feeling motivated. And other times we need a plan B or even a plan C, whereas maybe plan B is like, prepped ahead. We don't have to prep it then. And then plan C is like, what do I got in my bag? Like, let's just be prepared and not get frustrated or stuck in a situation where now we've kind of missed that opportunity. So I think trial and error, and like keeping hope that there will be something that works for you and that works for you really well. I see a lot of athletes like try and then it doesn't go well and then they kind of like give up, and that's not the case. So just keep going and trust the process, that this is helping you with your growth, with your development, and with continuing your sport.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I mean, food is a tool, not a chore. I think that's a key one for sure. But yeah, like having that tool, but having those backup options, I think that's so huge, whether it be in your bag, in your trunk, in your pantry, whatever you got to do to help you build those systems for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you hopping on, Meredith. Is there anywhere you want athletes to kind of see your work, if you're on any specific socials?
Yeah, my primary social is Instagram. It's at Meredith Parmley Sports RD. I try to stay active on there. It can be overwhelming, but that's where I'll post, what I'm doing at HCU and with the Dynamo and things like that, as well as some research and ideas for meals, snacks as they come up. So that would be the best way to find me.
Awesome. Well, yeah, again, thank you so much. And then for listeners, again, like, food is essential if you want to play at your potential. So, take advantage of the things that you're learning, take advantage of these resources like Meredith, and until next time, keep striving for greatness.